Selected, rest assured to read, Editor-in-Chief strongly recommends, same popular article, to cultivate swordsmanship, Tongtian set up a sword pool on Kunlun Mountain. Yi Changqing crossed over and became a fairy sword in the sword pool. Just as he was feeling disheartened, the divine level selection system was activated. As long as he makes a choice, he can receive various rewards. Facing choices at the beginning of the game, detected that the host has crossed into a sword, please make a choice. Option 1. Transform immediately. Reward 3,000 years of cultivation. Option 2. Temporarily do not transform, settle in the sword pool for thousands of years. Reward the indestructible sword body with 10,000 methods. Yi Changqing chose 2 without hesitation. When Tongtian returned from the Zhixiao palace and saw the empty sword pool, he looked bewildered and said, "Where is my sword?" He is the first disciple of the Xianmen sect and the first person of 3 generations. He is also the great disciple of Tongtian and the guardian god of the human race. He once guided the reincarnation of the earth in the vast sea of blood. I have also instructed Yu to create humans on the banks of the East China Sea. He has many nicknames. Changqing Sword Immortal, Human Sage, Changqing Emperor, Sword-Eating Ancestor. This is a different wilderness, where all beings are competing to cross. What is there at the end of the road? This book is also known as Eating Sword for 100,000 Years, I Am Invincible and I Am a Sword Immortal, Suppressing All Enemies. Keywords of the novel. Honghuang. Tongtian Rebellion, Zhu Xian you want to eat without pop-ups, Honghuang. Tongtian Rebellion, Zhu Xian you want to eat. Download the complete text. Honghuang. Tongtian Rebellion, Zhu Xian you want to eat the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Sword Pond Awakens, Eternal Law. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Sword Pond Awakens, Eternal Law. Kunlun Mountain is known as the ancestor of all mountains. In the world of floods and wastelands, it is one of the top fairyland blessings. Spiritual grass is everywhere on it, and immortal beasts are galloping. The spiritual energy is so rich that it has already atomized. Kunlun Mountain is vast and boundless, and many creatures have established caves or Taoist temples here. The 2 largest dojo sites on it are Sanqing Dojo in the eastern part of Kunlun and Zhuangmu Dojo in the western part of Kunlun. They are all famous powers in the wilderness. However, at this time, none of them were in Kunlun Mountain. Because not long ago, it was the day when the sage Hongjun preached. All powerful beings went to Chaos Zhixiao Palace to listen to the sage's path. In a corner of the Sanqing Daoist temple, there is a sword pool standing proudly here. The area of the sword pool is not large, but tens of thousands of immortal swords are scattered inside. The infinite sword energy crisscrosses, with astonishing power. The terrifying sword intent swept around, making the immortal birds and beasts in the dojo afraid to approach. This sword pool was set up when Tongtian once comprehended swordsmanship. It can be said that Tongtian's current achievements in swordsmanship are closely related to this sword pool. Where am I? At a certain moment, within the sword pool, a consciousness revived above an ordinary immortal sword. His name is Yi Changqing. Ben is an ordinary young man on earth. When I woke up, I found myself in such a strange place. I turned out to be a sword. After a long time, Yi Changqing finally realized her current situation. There are those who have traveled through time to become emperors, some have traveled through time to become beggars, but crossing into a sword, Yi Changqing had never heard of it before. Depression, fear, helplessness, despair, various emotions surfaced in Yi Changqing's heart. You may be the unlucky traveler, right? What can crossing into a sword do? Has someone been playing with you? With a sigh, Yi Changqing began to guess what kind of world he would travel to. The reason why he had this idea was also because he could feel a huge energy contained in his body. He doesn't know what this energy is, and he can't actively use it. But this does not prevent him from guessing the extraordinary world in this area. He realized that this could very well be a world of cultivating immortals. This gave Yi Changqing a glimmer of hope in his heart. Because if this is really a world of cultivation, then he has hope for transformation. Although opportunities are slim, there is always hope, isn't there? And at that moment, a mechanical voice without sadness or joy suddenly rang out in Yi Changqing's mind: God-level selection system binding. Binding completed. The system will randomly publish choices based on the host's situation, and the host will make a choice to receive corresponding rewards. Once a selection is made, it cannot be changed. If the final selection is not completed, the corresponding reward will be revoked. System. Yi Changqing was overjoyed at the words. He is naturally familiar with the system. After all, this is the standard configuration for the traveler. He was just speculating whether he would have a system, but he didn't expect the system to come soon. I really didn't disappoint him. With the system in place, Yi Changqing was filled with hope for the future. What if crossing becomes a sword? I can still stand at the top of this world. While Yi Changqing was full of energy, he also began to study the system. After studying, he found that this system really only has one function. That's making a choice. He immediately began to expect, when will the system give the first choice? I don't know if I heard his voice or if the time has come, but the system happened to have its first choice at this moment, detected that the host has crossed over and become a spiritual treasure sword of the later world. Please make a choice. Option 1. Transform immediately. Reward 3,000 years of cultivation. Option 2. Temporarily do not transform, settle in the sword pool for thousands of years. Reward the indestructible sword body. This sword body can enhance its strength and heal by devouring sword-type spiritual treasures. Finally, the first choice has arrived. While Yi Changqing was pleasantly surprised, she began to weigh which one was more advantageous for her. In fact, at the moment he heard the choice one, he had an irresistible impulse to choose it. After all, whether it's immediately transforming or rewarding 3,000 years of cultivation, the temptation for Yi Changqing is too great. There's no way, he's really not used to the sword body. However, reason restrained him. He found a keyword among the choices provided by the system. Lingbao, the next product to be purchased the day after tomorrow. This word left Yi Changqing in a daze. If he remembers correctly, this is a certain level of spiritual treasure in the vast world. So, isn't this a world of chaos? To be honest, Yi Changqing was a bit panicked. The Luo walks everywhere, but Zhu Xian is not as good as a dog. Dragon Han Cataclysm, Daoimo Controversy, which Demon Quantity Cataclysm, Sealing God Quantity Cataclysm measure one calamity after another. A slight carelessness is the end result of a life of death. When Yi Changqing thinks of the cruelty and widespread crisis of the world of famine, he feels a tingling sensation on his scalp. He couldn't help but pray in his heart that this should not be a desolate world. After careful consideration, Yi Changqing made a resolute decision. I choose 2. Whether this is a desolate world or not. Following his footsteps is crucial for him. Because this to some extent determines his potential and the upper limit he can reach in the future. Eternal sword body. It's very strong at first listen. Why not settle for 1,000 years for this? The host has made a choice and the reward has been issued at the same time as the system sound appeared. Yi Changqing immediately felt many unknown changes appearing on her body. These changes, for him as a novice practitioner, are indescribable. The way is unclear, and it is both mysterious and profound. But that elusive feeling told him that he really had a great improvement. Can you improve yourself by devouring sword-type spiritual treasures? As Yi Changqing pondered in his heart, he gazed at the countless sword-like spiritual treasures scattered here, unable to express his surprise. This is simply heaven for him. He eagerly thought, if all the sword-like spiritual treasures here were devoured, to what extent would his footwork improve? In a state of surprise, he never thought about why there are so many sword-like spiritual treasures here. Next, Yi Changqing began to constantly devour. One immortal sword after another was refined and absorbed by him, and his footwork and strength steadily improved in this process. Practice has no time, and the flood does not remember the year. In the blink of an eye, more than 900 years had passed. Chaos, in the Purple Sky Palace. Hongjun stopped preaching and spoke calmly, the first preaching ends here, and 10,000 years later, the second preaching begins. Next time, I will talk about the path of accuracy and sanctity. In the future, when preaching, we will still sit according to this seat and cannot change it. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Unfortunate Opportunities and the Return of Sanqing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Unfortunate Opportunities and the Return of Sanqing. After Hongjun finished speaking, his figure disappeared into the Purple Sky Palace. 3,000 Purple Sky guests saw this and coincidentally bowed to the place where Hongjun was sitting, then left in groups of 3 or 2. On the way. How do the two wise brothers feel about the achievements of this trip? Asked the Supreme Preceptor. Yuanshi pondered for a moment and said with a serious expression, I have gained a great deal. The words of the sage are extremely mysterious, and for me, it is like a sudden enlightenment. After listening to the sage's preaching, many previously confused areas were immediately resolved. Although my cultivation has not improved, I can feel that my foundation has improved a lot compared to before listening to the Tao. Upon hearing these words, Tongtian nodded in agreement and said, Second brother is right. The sage seems to know everything and be invincible. He has almost all knowledge about the 3,000 avenues. I don't know when we will also have such great power. After hearing the words of Tongtian, the Supreme Preceptor comforted and said, Don't worry, third brother. We are born with the Pangu primordial spirit and carry with us the creation of heaven and earth. Our chi is profound, and we are blessed with merit. In the future, we will be able to prove the fruit of the sage's way. Big brother, that's very true. Upon hearing these words, Yuanshi and Tongtian both nodded, full of confidence in their eyes. Big brother, will we directly return to Kunlun Mountain next, or will we first explore the vast land? Yuanshi looked at Taishang with a questioning intent in his gaze. Tongtian interjected, Why don't we just go back to Kunlun Mountain? We haven't honed our swordsmanship in the sword pool for 1,000 years, and I always feel a sense of emptiness in my heart. Taishang shook his head and said inexplicably, Don't rush back for now. I feel like there is a chance for us on Mount Buzhou. Take the chance and then return to Kunlun Mountain. Organic fate. Then listen to Big Brother. Both Yuanshi and Tongtian have no objections to this. After all, organic luck brings you home, don't waste it. Although Buzhouchen is still far from their current position, Sanqing, as the top powerhouse among the great Luo Golden Immortals, is their speed so fast. Not long after, they had already arrived at Mount Buzhou. At the same time, they also saw the opportunity of this trip. A gourd vine. No, to be precise, it should be the gourd on the gourd vine. Top quality innate spiritual root gourd vine. After seeing the target, Yuanshi couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. After all, this is a top-notch innate spiritual root. They are the top de Luo Jingxian in the wilderness, but this is only the first time they have seen the top-notch innate spiritual roots. There's no way, who made the number of top-quality innate spiritual roots in the wilderness too rare. There are actually 7 gourds growing on this gourd vine, and each gourd has the essence of a top-notch innate spiritual treasure. It's really terrifying. On the side of Tongtian, looking at the gourd vine, he also spoke with a sigh on his face. Taishang nodded and was about to speak when his heart moved and he looked up. I saw several figures flying towards this place in the distant sky. His face remained unchanged. Yuanshi's face froze as he looked at the emperor and said, Big brother, we. The emperor shook his head and said, This is the will of heaven. Let's each take one and leave. Abandoning a few top-notch innate spiritual treasures, although Yuan Shi was unwilling in his heart, he would not question the decision of the Supreme Emperor. Moreover, there are 7 Luo Jin immortals coming. There's no need to go too far and trigger an unnecessary war. Subsequently, Sanqing each took off a gourd and nodded to the 7 arriving Luo Jingxian before leaving. On the way back to Kunlun Mountain, another small incident happened. The apprentices were recruited all day long. Do you have a name? Looking at a young Taoist with a slightly chubby figure, Tongtian asked. Upon hearing this, the chubby Taoist dared not neglect and quickly replied, "My name is Duobao." Upon hearing this, Tongtian nodded and continued, "My seed is named Tongtian. My cultivation has reached the peak of the great Luo Golden Immortal. You have a master-disciple relationship with my seat. Would you be willing to apprentice to me?" After hearing Tongtian's words, Duobao did not hesitate at all. He immediately knelt down and respectfully clasped his fists, saying, "I am willing." Disciple Duobao, pay respects to the master. During this period, cultivation was difficult and most living beings did not even have formal methods of cultivation. Having a powerful master is definitely twice the result with half the effort for cultivation. And the cultivation of the Luo Jin Xian's peak is already the highest strength under the sage at this time. So, for Tongtian's active recruitment, Duobao has no reason to refuse. The Supreme Court and Yuan Shi on the side saw this, although their brows furrowed slightly and they didn't like Tongtian's eagerness to accept their apprentices, their brotherly affection was deep and it was not easy to brush each other's face. "What else can I do if I have collected everything?" "Oh, you can also give a gift for the meeting." After this little interlude, the 4 of them embarked on a journey back to Kunlun Mountains. And at this time, it happened to be 1,000 years since Yi Changqing got the system, finally arrived. First, go to the sword pool to practice swordsmanship. After returning to the dojo, Tongtian's face lit up with joy and he immediately flew towards the sword pool. After listening to the preaching of the sage Hongjun, he felt that his understanding of swordsmanship had reached a higher level, with a feeling of clearing the clouds and seeing the moon shining brightly. He can't wait to try it out. But suddenly, his face changed. Not good. My sword pool. With a cry of surprise from the sky, the figure instantly disappeared into place, and when it reappeared, it had already arrived at the sword pool. Taishang, Yuanshi, and Duobao followed closely behind and also rushed over. Taishang and Yuanshi were worried about Tongtian. When they saw Tongtian so anxious, they were worried about something unexpected. As for Duobao, it's just curiosity. Sword. My sword. Where have all my fairy swords gone? Looking at the empty sword pool from the sky, my eyes were red and filled with an incredulous look in my eyes. He really can't believe it. I just went to listen to a Tao, and when I returned, all the tens of thousands of immortal swords in the sword pool were gone. He felt depressed and wanted to vomit blood, but at the same time, his heart was extremely crazy. Who the hell is it? Stolen my immortal sword. Destroyed my sword pool. Roaring angrily in the tone of the sky. He still had some confusion in his heart. Why did the swords in the sword pool disappear for no reason, even though the formation arranged outside their dojo was still intact and undamaged? At this moment, the Supreme Preceptor suddenly reminded, "Third brother, look over there, there is still a sword left. Inside that sword, there is actually an independent consciousness. Is the disappearance of 10,000 immortal swords within the sword pool related to it? Is there still a sword left behind?" Tongtian immediately looked over and indeed, there was still a sword left there. It is also the only remaining sword in the sword pool. Just now he didn't notice. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The Treasure of the Day After Tomorrow. Unclean Sword Heart. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The Treasure of the Day After Tomorrow. Unclean Sword Heart. The quality of this sword has actually reached the pinnacle of the acquired treasure. Tongtian was very surprised in his heart. Because he remembers very clearly that the best quality sword in the sword pool before was just the best one after tomorrow. It's not that he doesn't want to throw a higher level sword into it, it's just that he has a heart and is powerless. The Xianjian, which is at the level of innate spiritual treasure, is extremely rare in the wilderness. He only has one item on his body, so it is impossible to throw it into it. And the heavenly treasure level fairy sword is not only difficult to refine, but also difficult to obtain materials. At least, he traveled through the wilderness for tens of thousands of years without finding suitable materials. So, where did this heavenly treasure level sword come from? Could it be that there is a thought in Tongtian's heart? There is only one possibility. This sword gave birth to consciousness and devoured the remaining tens of thousands of swords in the sword pool. As for how it devoured it, I don't know for sure. He speculated that this sword may have special abilities. Third brother, how are you going to deal with this sword? I thought you might as well erase its consciousness in my brother's opinion. In this way, you can get a divine sword at the level of the acquired treasure. With your swordsmanship, your combat power can be increased by more than 10%. Upon hearing this, Tongtian shook his head without hesitation and said, "No, its consciousness was born in the sword pool, and it is destined for me. If it can transform into form, I will take it as my personal disciple and pass on its swordsmanship. It cultivates swordsmanship with its sword body, and will surely be able to carry forward swordsmanship. Compared to it, an acquired treasure is just icing on the cake for me, therefore, I cannot destroy it." After hearing Tongtian's words, Yuan Shi shook his head and continued, "Practicing swordsmanship with a sword body may result in twice the result with half the effort, but cultivation is the foundation. He is just a follower after birth, and his achievements in this life are limited. Whether he can break through to the Luo Jin Xian is unknown. Is it worth abandoning a precious treasure after birth for this reason?" Tongtian said with a firm tone, "It's worth it. The Great Way is 50, and the Heavenly Yen is 40.9. Escape one of them, and I am willing to give it a glimmer of vitality. Then it's up to you, after all, this is your sword." Upon seeing this, Yuan Shi shook his head and said nothing more. As for Tai Shang, he never spoke a word from beginning to end. He only occasionally glanced at Yi Changqing's sword body, and his gaze showed a hint of contemplation. At this moment, Duobao suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Master, look at that sword, it's shining." Upon hearing this, Sanqing instinctively looked over. Sure enough, the sword's body emitted a brilliant light. That's not an ordinary light. But sword light. Endless sword light. What's going on? Yuan Shi looked at Tongtian with some confusion. "It's about to take shape," said Tongtian with a slightly fixed gaze. "Yes, Yi Changqing is about to transform. Because just now, the system's selection appeared for the second time. Detected that the host has devoured all the immortal swords in the sword pool. Please make a choice. Option 1. Instantly transform into form. Reward the clean sword heart. Whether it's swordsmanship, sword intent, etc., everything related to swordsmanship is easy for the host to comprehend. Option 2. Do not transform temporarily, settle in the sword pool for 3,000 years. Reward congenital heal. Distributed after 3,000 years. After seeing these two choices provided by the system, Yi Changqing hesitated for a moment before making a decision. I choose 1. He can devour the immortal sword and improve his heal. In 3,000 years, he may also be promoted to an innate heal with his own strength. Even if you can't get promoted, there will always be a day when you can get promoted. There's no need to wait for another 3,000 years in this dark and lonely sword pool for this. He has been longing for transformation in his heart for too long. He can no longer tolerate this loneliness and solitude. Moreover, choosing 1 as the reward for the unclean sword heart is also quite good. Even to a certain extent, it is more suitable for him than congenital ankles. The reward has been distributed in an instant. Yi Changqing noticed that there seemed to be something extra in her body. Mysterious and mysterious at the same time, Yi Changqing also felt his mind becoming clearer. Before he could study it carefully, a sense of crisis suddenly struck in his heart. He watched according to his feelings. I saw endless thunder gathering in the high sky. The terrifying power presses countless creatures near Kunlun Mountain, afraid to look up. This is my transformation calamity. Yi Changqing's heart instantly understood. He doesn't dare to be careless, he's on high alert. During this period, the heavenly way was incomplete, and there was no transformation calamity for ordinary creatures. But Yi Changqing is different. He is an outlier. At the same time, he is still the most precious form after birth. It cannot be said that it is not tolerated by the heavenly way, but in order to transform, one must at least suffer some calamity. Boom! The thunder that had been saved up fell instantly. The sword pool was splattered with lightning. It must be mentioned here that there are defensive formations arranged in the sky around the sword pool. And this defensive formation unintentionally relieved some pressure on Yi Changqing at this moment. Tongtian's face is not good looking. After all, this sword pool was his countless years of hard work. Nowadays, being ravaged by thunder is bound to cause serious damage. But he still didn't have the idea of throwing Yi Changqing out. Because in his heart, he already regarded Yi Changqing as his disciple. What is it to lose a sword pool for the sake of one's own disciple? The most skilled skill of Tongtian is swordsmanship. My favorite is also kendo. So, he had high expectations for Yi Changqing in his heart. Pain. This is the only feeling that Yi Changqing has at this moment. It's strange, even though his body is like a sword, he clearly feels the pain. The power of this thunder is too powerful. Even after being reduced by the defensive formation, when it landed on Yi Changqing's body, the sword still shuddered. On the blade, there were sword sounds, as if telling of its indomitability. Boom! 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 Thunder fell one after another. The sword pool gradually collapsed and disintegrated after being chopped. Tongtian's eyelids twitched as he watched from the side, and he thought to himself, "Good disciple, you must be strong. If you fail to transform, then the sword pool of my master will be chopped for nothing." Fortunately, Yi Changqing did not disappoint him. After 9 thunderbolts, the thunder disaster dissipated and the sky returned to clear again. And Yi Changqing also successfully transformed. Yi Changqing, dressed in green clothes, lay powerless in the sword pool. His handsome face was particularly pale at this moment. Success. I have finally transformed. From now on, birds can fly high in the sky, and fish can leap in the vast sea. Although Yi Changqing is not in good condition at this moment, he is extremely excited in his heart. And just then, a voice rang in his ear. Congratulations, you have successfully transformed. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Heavenly Harvest of Apprentices, Formation in Dao Talent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Heavenly Harvest of Apprentices, Formation in Dao Talent. Who's talking? Upon hearing these words, Yi Changqing was immediately taken aback. He looked at the sound. Unexpectedly, a young man appeared next to him. This young man has a faint sense of authority on his body. Clearly not strong. But it gave Yi Changqing an intuition that if the other party was willing, one finger could crush him to death. And this is not what shocked Yi Changqing the most. What shocked him even more was the terrifying sword intent he felt from this young man. Although the sword's intent remains silent, ordinary creatures may not be able to perceive it. But Yi Changqing is a sword. He is particularly sensitive to sword intent. The sword intent on the opponent's body seems to condense into essence. And the other person's temperament is more like an unsheathed long sword. Show your sharpness. Who is this guy? What is the purpose? Are you trying to tame me and make me his weapon? It seems that I am not his opponent. If his goal is really to win me over, what should I do? Are you surrendering, trying your best to escape, or just self-destructing? Yi Changqing's heart is in turmoil. The joy of transformation disappeared completely in an instant. His mind was filled with various thoughts and speculations. However, although he thought a bit too much, the expression on his face remained unchanged from beginning to end. He stood up reluctantly and clenched his fists at Tongtian, saying, I have seen you before. Do you know why you are looking for me? Tongtian looked at Yi Changqing with a hint of surprise and asked, Don't you know me? As soon as he spoke, he answered himself, That's right. Your consciousness has just been born, so it's normal not to know me. Do you know where this place is? Upon hearing this, Yi Changqing shook his head and said, I don't know, but please advise me, senior. Tongtian smiled and said, This is my dojo. After hearing Tongtian's words, Yi Changqing's face changed. Then he pointed to the sword pool beside him and asked with a hesitant tone, Then this sword pool? Tongtian seemed to know what he was going to say and nodded, saying, That's right, this sword pool was also arranged by me. In the past, I built this sword pool to understand swordsmanship. For countless years, I have been improving it. Speaking of which, Tongtian cast a complex glance at Yi Changqing and let out a long sigh, saying, But I didn't expect that I was just going out once. When I returned, not only did you devour tens of thousands of immortal swords in the sword pool, but even the sword pool itself was destroyed by your transformation thunder. This. Yi Changqing felt a chill in his heart as he listened, speechless. This is a big deal. I was born into the opponent's dojo. The most difficult thing is to devour the opponent's tens of thousands of immortal swords. How can this be returned? He was confused, and just as he was feeling uneasy in his heart, he heard Tongtian continue to say, How can you compensate me for my loss? Upon hearing this, Yi Changqing tentatively said, Can you give me some time, senior? I will definitely make up for my losses in the future. Oh. How long do you need? Tongtian asked with great interest. After pondering for a moment, Yi Changqing said, Can 10,000 years be enough? After hearing Yi Changqing's words, Tongtian refused without hesitation, No, I can't wait that long. Upon hearing this, Yi Changqing immediately looked helpless and said, Senior has also seen it. I have just transformed, and I cannot draw so many immortal swords. Tongtian chuckled and said, How about this? I think your swordsmanship talent is pretty good. If you worship me as your teacher, you don't need to compensate for these tens of thousands of immortal swords. Ah! Yi Changqing was confused. What kind of divine unfolding is this? Why did it suddenly involve apprenticeship? He doesn't know much about this world yet, and he also has no knowledge of the identity and background of the person in front of him. How can he easily become a disciple? But if we don't learn from our teachers, we won't be able to come up with this huge compensation ourselves. I'm really conflicted, and at this moment, what Yi Changqing didn't expect was that the sound of the system appeared again, detected that Tongtian intends to accept the host as an apprentice. Please ask the host to make a choice. Option 1. Agree to apprentice. Reward the supreme array talent. Option 2. Refuse to apprentice. Reward the innate treasure-killing spear. This. After hearing the system's choice, Yi Changqing's heart suddenly felt like a galloping horse, unable to calm down for a long time. He was not shocked by the two choices of rewards, but shocked by that name. Tongtian. Is it the Tongtian? Yi Changqing took a deep breath and looked at Tongtian with complex eyes, asking, Do you dare to ask the respected name of the senior? After hearing Yi Changqing's words, Tongtian didn't mind. He nodded and smiled, saying, This is right. To become a disciple, one must first know the master's background. I am not boasting. If you worship me as your teacher, you will not be humiliated. I am the incarnation of Panga Yuanshen, the heavenly sovereign of the upper Qing Ling Bao among the three cleans. The first batch of innate creatures in the wilderness. Now, my cultivation has reached the peak of the great Luo Golden Immortal, and I am one of the top talents in the world. In addition, I have two older brothers who are also the pinnacle cultivators of the great Luo Golden Immortal. It can be said that if you worship me as your teacher, you immediately have three powerful backers. For you, there are benefits without harm. It's really that towering. I actually came to the world of the wilderness. Yi Changqing's heart was suddenly filled with mixed flavors. Although he had guessed before. But now it is completely certain. A golden immortal is not as good as a dog, and a big Luo walks on the ground. Are you lucky or unlucky? With a bitter smile in her heart, Yi Changqing also made a choice. I choose one. Once you come, be content with it. Since we can't change the fact of time travel, let's enjoy it. What about the chaotic world? Having your own system, you may not be able to stand at the top of this world in the future. As for why choose one? This is also the result of careful consideration by Yi Changqing. One thing is, even if he has the divine killer spear now, it's useless. I dare not even take it out to avoid causing big trouble. After all, the divine killer spear is the weapon of the demon ancestor Luo Gui. And now, it seems that it hasn't been too long since Luo Gui fell. Take it out, it's like setting oneself on fire. Secondly, he has no other choice but to apprentice now. He can't take out the compensation again. Escape. Don't tease me. He is facing Sanqing. Thirdly, just as Tongtian said, after he became a disciple, he immediately had three powerful backers. As long as you don't commit suicide, you don't have to worry too much about safety issues. As for the future collapse of the intercepted church, the disciples in the sect will suffer heavy casualties, and even Tongtian will be imprisoned in the Zixiao Palace. These things have not yet happened. There is still a chance to change. For example, with their own presence, those 2 or 5 young men will not have a chance to live until the time of Fengshen Liangjie. P.S. Brothers who have recommended votes, please help vote. Thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Apprenticeship to Heaven, First Apprentice Struggle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Apprenticeship to Heaven, First Apprentice Struggle. Rewards have been distributed. Yi Changqing immediately felt that there had been some changes in her body. But he couldn't explain the specific changes. He speculated that perhaps when he comprehends the formation in the future, he will be able to feel the effect of the supreme formation talent. Subsequently, Yi Changqing bowed to Tongtian and said, I have seen my master before. Tongtian laughed heartily and lifted Yi Changqing's body with his magic, saying, Good disciple, don't be too polite. Come, I will take you to pay respects to your 2 senior uncles. By the way, do you have a name? Yi Changqing replied, Yes, my disciple's name is Yi Changqing. Evergreen. Not bad. As he spoke, Tongtian's figure flashed back to the side of Taishang and Yuanshi. Yi Changqing followed closely behind and followed up. This is your grand preceptor. This is your Yuanshi senior uncle. This is also a disciple who has just been recruited by the teacher. He is ordered to call Duobao. Please call him senior brother. Tongtian pointed to the 3 members of the Supreme Court and introduced them to Yi Changqing one by one. Upon hearing these words, Yi Changqing dared not neglect them and immediately bowed, saying, I have seen senior uncle Tai, senior uncle Yuanshi, and senior brother Duobao. Taishang and Yuanshi nodded and each took out an item and handed it to Yi Changqing, saying to him, Martial nephew, this is a little gift from master. Please accept it. The crown prince gave a white porcelain vase, and if nothing unexpected happens, it should be filled with elixir. At the beginning, what was given was a fairy sword. Judging from its quality, it was truly a spiritual treasure from the sky. Upon seeing this, Yi Changqing glanced at Tongtian. After seeing the other person nod, he didn't show any affectation and casually put away the gift. At the same time, he also thanked the Supreme Court and Yuan Shi. And Duobao, with a painful expression on his face, took out an elixir and handed it to Yi Changqing, saying, "Junior brother, this is a gift for our brother's meeting. Please don't mind." This elixir goes without saying much, it was naturally taken from the gift given to him by the emperor. One can increase your mana for thousands of years. Just send it out like this. Of course Duobao feels sorry. However, besides the elixir, there were no more suitable items on him as for not delivering. Shaming oneself is a small matter, I'm afraid it will leave a bad impression on my master and uncle. But when faced with Duobao's meeting gift, Yi Changqing shook his head and smiled, saying, "Senior brother's meeting gift is not necessary. If possible, I would like to spar with senior brother and discuss with each other." Duel. Upon hearing this, Duobao was momentarily stunned, and then looked at Yi Changqing with a thoughtful expression, without immediately responding. He is guessing what Yi Changqing's move means. Is it really just for sparring? After hearing Yi Changqing's words, Tongtian was also somewhat surprised. However, he did not refuse. Instead, he smiled and said, "Changqing's proposal is good. Duobao, you are in the middle stage of the golden immortal cultivation, while Changqing is in the early stage of the golden immortal cultivation. The difference in cultivation between you is not too big. By sparring, one can also recognize their own shortcomings. There's no need to change places, let's practice here." Between senior brothers, it's all up to the point. Seeing that Tongtian had spoken, Duobao naturally couldn't refuse anymore. He clenched his fists and said to Yi Changqing, "Then I'll ask junior brother for guidance." It is worth mentioning that this time, his tone of voice was very plain, and he no longer had the same enthusiasm as before. After all, he could naturally see that Yi Changqing's proposal for sparring was not kind. It's normal for him to feel unhappy in his heart. And the reason why Yi Changqing suggested sparring is also because of the system. That's right, just now the system released a new selection, detected that the host has been apprenticed to the heavens, please make a choice. Option 1. Become the great disciple of Tongtian and the first disciple of Xianmen. Reward the top. Quality innate spiritual treasure mountain, river, and country map. Note. The system rewards the host with a dominant spiritual treasure, which will erase its cause and effect in the vast world. Option 2. Let nature take its course and become the second disciple who connects to the heavens. Reward 10,000 years of cultivation. After hearing these two choices, Yi Changqing hardly hesitated and chose one. After all, the most essential thing in the wilderness is time. Although there may seem to be many years of cultivation, its value is far inferior to a top. Quality innate spiritual treasure. Innate Lingbao belongs to non-renewable resources. Not to mention the top. Quality innate spiritual treasures among them, their preciousness cannot be described in words. Anyway, there aren't many top. Quality innate spiritual treasures in the entire wilderness. So, as long as your brain is not bad, you know how to choose. At the same time as he made his choice, the system had already given him the map of mountains and rivers, which was temporarily stored in the system space. At the same time, it wiped out all the causes and effects of the past, present, and future of the mountain, river, and country map. That is to say, in the future, if he uses the map of mountains, rivers, and lands, Hongjun and Nyuhua will not come to trouble him. Even Hongjun doesn't remember having a map of mountains, rivers, and land before. It has to be said that the system is really powerful. However, Yi Changqing cannot be too happy too early. After all, only when he successfully completes the task will the mountain, river, and country map truly belong to him. If it is not completed, the reward system will still retract it. So, there was Yi Changqing's proposal of sparring just now. He doesn't want to take the initiative to cause trouble either. But the system gave too much, senior brother, I have offended you. As Yi Changqing spoke, the top-grade postnatal spirit treasure fairy sword in his hand, which he had just obtained from Yuanshi, suddenly turned into a stream of light and shot towards Duobao. If it is any other creature that has just obtained this sword, it naturally needs to be refined before it can be used. But Yi Changqing doesn't use it. He possesses an indestructible sword body, and all sword treasures in the world have a full affinity for him. He doesn't need to refine, he can use it. Duobao's face changed when he saw this. He doesn't have the advantage of Yi Changqing, so he can only take out his own later world spirit treasure to welcome Yi Changqing's attack. During this period, not only were the methods of cultivation difficult to obtain, but spiritual treasures were also difficult to obtain. Not to mention the innate spiritual treasure, it has basically been plundered by Honghuang. The spiritual treasure of the day after tomorrow needs to be refined. How many creatures can refine the postnatal spiritual treasures? Most creatures just take the materials and refine them casually, as long as they can be used. Previously, Duobao was also one of them. However, although Duobao is at a disadvantage in weapons, his cultivation level is still slightly higher than that of Yi Changqing. Don't look like it's just a small realm, normally speaking, the gap is still very large. It's not a problem for a creature in the middle stage of the Golden Immortal to defeat 10 creatures in the early stage of the Golden Immortal. But Yi Changqing is not an ordinary early cultivator of the Golden Immortal. On the one hand, he possesses the top-notch Lingbao Immortal Sword. On the other hand, his swordsmanship is powerful, with terrifying sword energy running through every move he makes. You should know that Kendo is one of the most powerful avenues of attack. So for a while, both of them fought back and forth. P.S. My favorites won't be all robots, will they? Robot Buckle 1, Live Person Buckle 2, end of this chapter. Chapter 6. Transforming oneself into a sword, Duobao suffered a disastrous defeat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Transforming oneself into a sword, Duobao suffered a disastrous defeat. To be honest, the sparring at this time is somewhat unfair to Duobao. After all, he has just been accepted as an apprentice by Tongtian. Has not yet been taught divine powers and techniques by Tongtian. His attack is very singular. And this is also the norm for most living beings. So, many living beings are very eager to join the sect of great power and learn some true skills. And what about Yi Changqing? Although he has just started his apprenticeship, his attack power cannot be underestimated. He had previously devoured tens of thousands of immortal swords. This has piled up the sword intent on him to a very terrifying level. That is to say, he has just been born and has little combat experience. Otherwise, Duobao wouldn't be able to move 100 moves under his command. However, as the sparring progresses, Yi Changqing's attack became increasingly smooth. Duobao's face was serious, and his heart was almost driven crazy. He couldn't accept it, his mid-stage cultivation as a golden immortal was being suppressed and beaten by an early golden immortal. If he loses, he really doesn't have the face to face anyone. But faced with Yi Changqing's repeated sword attacks, he was really helpless. On the side, Sanqing was also secretly transmitting messages and communicating. The Supreme Preceptor said, Changqing's mastery of sword intent is really good. He has just been born and can achieve level crossing challenges. With your guidance, third brother, his future achievements are limitless. Yuanshi retorted, in this battle, Changqing has the advantage of following others. Duobao has not learned any divine powers or techniques yet. If this competition were to be held after 10,000 years, the outcome would still be unknown. Tongtian smiled faintly and said, this sparring is just giving them a rough understanding of their own strength. Winning or losing is not important. And as they talked, the battle had also come to an end. I saw Yi Changqing suddenly put away the top-grade Lingbao Immortal Sword from the day after tomorrow, integrating his thoughts and transforming into his true form a blue sword about 3 feet long, carrying a terrifying aura, shot towards Duobao. This attack is Yi Changqing's strongest means of attack at this time. The sword energy is vast and majestic, stretching for thousands of zhang. Duobao's face changed dramatically, and his fear in his heart had reached its peak. He thought reluctantly to himself, is there such a big gap between me and him? At this moment, he had doubts about himself however, his hand movements did not stop. At this point, it's too late to hide, and there's nowhere to hide. All he can do is hard connect. So he mobilized all his mana and laid a defensive barrier in front of him. He knew in his heart that this mere defensive barrier could never stop Yi Changqing's physical attack. But he has no other choice. At this moment, a strong desire to become stronger sprouted in his heart. He told himself. Although he lost today, he can definitely defeat Yi Changqing someday. Boom. No surprise. Yi Changqing's transformed blue sword collided with Duobao's defensive barrier. In an instant, the barrier shattered. Duobao was also knocked back hundreds of feet and lay on the ground. At this moment, his face turned pale and blood flowed from the corners of his mouth. If it weren't for Yi Changqing leaving his hand in the end, he would have been pierced through his body by Yi Changqing, and at least it would have been a serious injury by then. Now, he just suffered some minor injuries. I'll accept it, senior brother Duobao. After Yi Changqing regained his body and apologized to Duobao, he clenched his fists and reached out his hand, intending to pull Duobao up from the ground. Duobao glanced at Yi Changqing's outstretched hand, hesitated for a moment, and finally grabbed the other person's hand, which was then pulled up. Duobao sighed and returned with a clasped fist, saying in a complex tone, "You won." Subsequently, the two of them returned to Sanqing's side together. Tongtian looked at the two of them and said, "Changqing, although you have won, don't be arrogant or complacent. Cultivation, mentality is very important. Only by not being arrogant or impatient can we go further. Duobao, although you lost, don't be discouraged. Your talent is good, practice well, and you will definitely be able to prove your way in the future. Adhere to the teachings of your master." After hearing Tongtian's words, Duobao and Yi Changqing quickly bowed in response. Later, Duobao glanced at Yi Changqing and then turned his gaze to Tongtian. He spoke inexplicably, "Master, junior brother's strength is much stronger than mine, which makes me feel inferior. Let him sit in this position of senior brother." Upon hearing this, Tongtian glanced at Duobao with some surprise, then turned his gaze to Yi Changqing and asked, "Changqing, what do you think?" After hearing Tongtian's words, Yi Changqing's face remained unchanged and his tone remained calm as he replied, "To be honest with master, I do indeed intend to hold the position of senior brother. Dueling with senior brother Duobao is also to understand his strength and see if he is qualified to be my senior brother." Tongtian nodded and smiled, "You are very honest. Since that's the case, you will be my eldest disciple from now on, and Duobao will be my second disciple." "Yes, master." Yi Changqing and Duobao nodded and said yes. Later, Duobao looked at Yi Changqing and said seriously, "I hope you can promise me something." Yi Changqing was surprised and asked, "What's going on?" "In the future, if I surpass you in strength, then I will take back the position of senior brother. Is that okay?" Duobao is a person who refuses to give up. Although this time, he saw a significant gap between himself and Yi Changqing. He has almost no fighting power. But he believed that after learning some of his master's skills, his strength would definitely undergo a tremendous change. At that time, he hopes to bring back what he lost today. After hearing Duobao's words, Yi Changqing smiled and nodded in agreement without hesitation, "Okay, I promise you." He won't be afraid of any challenges. Even if the other party is one of the top quasi-saints under the future sage. Seeing the agreement between the two disciples, Tongtian not only did not feel angry, but also somewhat pleased to see it come to fruition. Because in this way, both of them will inevitably be filled with stronger motivation. One wants to surpass the other. A person who doesn't want to be surpassed by the other person. Isn't this rolled up? Good thing. Alright, you two come with me to the Qin Palace. Tongtian said a word to them and flew towards the Sanqing Palace first. Yi Changqing and Duobao followed closely behind. As for Taishang and Yuan Shi, they both left separately. Along the way, they saw many rare and exotic beasts. A crane with noble temperament, a green bull with a long single horn. There are ginseng dolls that can run Lingji, emitting colorful light. Too many, it's dazzling to see. Duobao is fine, he has walked through the wilderness for thousands of years and has some knowledge. But it was the first time Yi Changqing had seen it, and the shock in her heart was beyond measure. This is the wilderness. It's really interesting. At this moment, Yi Changqing is full of expectations for the future. P.S. Thank you, my good friend, for your support and recommendation vote. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Master-Apprentice Conversation, Fusion of Sword Intention. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Master-Apprentice Conversation, Fusion of Sword Intention. In the Sanqing Palace. Sitting upright on the main seat above the main hall. He smiled and said, there aren't so many rules in our sect. As long as you don't bully your master and destroy your ancestors, or harm your fellow disciples, don't blame me for being ruthless and cleaning up the door. Upon hearing this, Yi Changqing and Duobao said seriously. Then, Tongtian continued, since I was born with the cultivation of the great Luo Golden Immortal, I didn't think much about practicing martial arts before becoming a master. During this period, I will take some time to organize and strive to create the techniques as soon as possible. However, although I don't have any martial arts techniques, I have developed many supernatural powers and techniques with your two masters before I became my master. Now I will pass them on to you. Speaking, Tongtian pointed to Yi Changqing and Duobao's eyebrows. At the same time, he continued, what I have passed to you as my teacher is the 36 laws of the heavenly gang, which are all great supernatural powers. You can find suitable diligent cultivation from them. Remember to chew too much, not too much expensive essence. No matter how much you learn, but what you don't master yourself, then your supernatural powers will be useless. After hearing this, Yi Changqing and Duobao nodded thoughtfully. Then, Tongtian continued, in terms of weapons, what your Yuanshi uncle gave you were all attack weapons. So, as a teacher, I will give you a defensive weapon. While speaking, he waved his right hand to the sky. Then I saw two items crossing the sky and finally falling into the hands of Yi Changqing and Duobao. In Yi Changqing's hand is a shield. In Duobao's hand is a pagoda. The pressure on these two weapons is similar, indicating that their levels are the same. In fact, they are all top-notch spiritual treasures acquired after birth. Taking action from the heavens is not only top-notch, but also does not favor one over the other. Even more grand than the top-quality products given by Yuanshi. After all, this is the true master. Thank you very much for giving me the treasure, master. As Yi Changqing and Duobao put away their weapons, they all bowed and clasped their fists in unison. Tongtian shook his head and smiled, saying, if it's okay, you can leave. As for the cave, you can freely choose a place within the dojo. There isn't that much attention to detail. If you encounter any confusion in your practice, you can ask me as a teacher. By the way, if you have time, you can stroll around the dojo more. Maybe there will be some opportunities. Upon hearing this, Yi Changqing quickly said, Master, do you have any experience in formations? I want to learn from you. After hearing Yi Changqing's words, Tongtian frowned slightly and said, Changqing, you are a fairy sword transformation. You should focus more energy on swordsmanship. Although the formation adds strength, it requires a lot of energy to learn. You distract your energy from learning formations, that's a behavior of sacrificing the essence for the end. Don't ever have such thoughts again in the future. Adhere to the teachings of your master. Upon hearing Tongtian's decisive words, Yi Changqing dared not continue to inquire. He plans to wait until later to find another opportunity. Subsequently, Yi Changqing and Duobao left the Sanqing palace. After walking out of the palace gate, Yi Changqing asked, "Junior brother Duobao, are you going to visit the dojo together?" Duobao shook his head and said, "No, I plan to find a place to build a cave as soon as possible and then close down." "Okay, let's part ways then." Yi Changqing naturally knows about Duobao's thoughts. Don't you just want to improve your strength as soon as possible, defeat yourself, and regain the position of senior brother? However, Yi Changqing shook his head in his heart and didn't have much confidence in him. If effort is useful, what else should we compare ourselves to? Subsequently, Yi Changqing began to wander around the dojo on his own. The area of Sanqing Daochang is very large. But fortunately, Yi Changqing's speed is not slow either. Not long after, he arrived at a mountain wall. I saw that the mountain wall was covered with dense sword marks. Yi Changqing speculated that this should have been left by the master during his previous sword practice. I don't know how many years have passed, but now the sword intent still lingers on these sword marks. After being amazed for a moment, Yi Changqing didn't hesitate and immediately began to absorb these sword meanings. Absorption, also known as comprehension. He possesses an indestructible sword body, and comprehending these sword meanings is as simple as eating and drinking water for him. In just one stick of incense, he successfully integrated these sword meanings into his own sword meanings. After fusion, his sword intent suddenly became much stronger. In the Sanqing palace, upon seeing this scene, Tongtian nodded and smiled, murmuring to himself, "Changqing's swordsmanship talent is really outstanding." But then he sighed again and said, "Unfortunately, his footwork is only the day after tomorrow, and I don't know if there is any hope in this life that he can break through Daluo. Otherwise, his future achievements may not be weaker than mine." Shaking his head, Tongtian stopped paying attention to Yi Changqing and walked out of the main hall towards the neighboring Taiqing palace. He wants to find the Supreme Emperor and Yuan Shi to work together to create a cultivation technique. Creating techniques is also a process of polishing one's own foundation, and I believe they will not refuse. On the other side, Yi Changqing, who had absorbed the sword's intent, continued to move forward. As he walked, he came to a small river. The scenery here is beautiful, and there is also a 10-mile peach blossom forest next to it. Yi Changqing fell in love with this place at first sight. It's perfect to build a cave here. Of course, the scenery is only one aspect, and another reason is that Yi Changqing discovered a colorful chicken growing here. You can tell at a glance that it's delicious. He is a foodie who cannot resist the temptation of chickens. Do as you please. Soon, a wooden house was already formed. Yi Changqing doesn't want to build a palace. But it's because he doesn't have the materials. Having a heart is powerless. We can only replace it with a wooden house. However, although it is just a wooden house, there is no need to worry about its sturdiness. The trees in the wasteland world are harder than diamonds. After the wooden house was built, Yi Changqing settled down. He plans to take a break first. The matter of visiting the dojo is not urgent, there is plenty of time in the future. Half an hour later. Yi Changqing was eating roasted chicken while recalling his own experience today. Looking back now. Still as dreamy as ever. He not only traveled to the desolate world, but also became the great disciple of the future sage. There are advantages and disadvantages to being a disciple of the sage who connects with the heavens. Fortunately, before sealing the god of wealth, there is no need to worry too much about his safety. After all, after becoming a saint, Tongtian's strength is also one of the best among saints. The downside is that during the war of sealing the gods, the disciples who intercepted the teachings were really miserable. Almost wiped out. Yi Changqing had to be proactive and start thinking ahead of time about ways to break the situation. His first thought was why the Catholic Church was destroyed, or rather why it was targeted by several saints. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Future Planning, Tiangang Divine Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Duobao Challenge, 10 times Intelligence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Duobao Challenge, 10 times Intelligence. Flying Sands and Rocks. Rapid winds mixed with sand and stones, group attack skills crossing the sea with mountains. Crossing the sea with mountains scattering beans into soldiers. Scattering beans to become an army ding 7 arrows. A technique of cursing the heart, used in conjunction with talismans to form seals, can capture the enemy's 3 souls and 7 souls, and take people's lives from other places. After thinking about it, Yi Changqing's first divine skill he wanted to cultivate was mediation and creation. There is no other reason. Just because it's too high. Next, Yi Changqing entered a state of cultivation. Time slowly passes by. 200 years passed in the blink of an eye. At a certain moment, Yi Changqing suddenly opened her eyes. His face couldn't conceal a look of disappointment. Yes, he failed. I have realized for 200 years, not to mention that I have mastered it, I have not even started. This made Yi Changqing couldn't help but start doubting his own intelligence. Is one's own intelligence really so poor? This failed realization caused a great sense of frustration in his heart. He felt a bit nostalgic for the feeling of realizing the meaning of the sword, how easy it was. However, it's also possible that it's just that mediating is too difficult, which is why I didn't realize success. Let's first understand some simple things. After thinking it over, Yi Changqing began his second enlightenment. Soon, another 300 years have passed. On this day, a rare guest came from outside the wooden house. Is senior brother here? Junior brother, please see me. Upon hearing Duobao's shout, Yi Changqing immediately opened her eyes. Upon closer inspection, one could see a hint of helplessness flickering in his eyes. He sorted his emotions for a moment, walked out of the wooden house, and smiled at Duobao, saying, "Junior brother is a rare guest. He goes to the 3 treasures hall for nothing. I wonder why junior brother is here." Upon hearing this, Duobao didn't show any interest and smiled at Yi Changqing, saying, "I'm here to compete with my senior brother. I hope you can teach me generously." After hearing Duobao's words, Yi Changqing narrowed his eyes and casually asked, "I wonder if junior brother has learned several divine powers from the 36 laws of the heavenly gang. Duobao pondered for a moment and said calmly, "Junior brother, my understanding is ordinary. I only learned 15 types. I wonder how many senior brothers have learned. Cough cough, I'm about the same as you." Yi Changqing chuckled twice and didn't want to discuss this topic anymore. He was extremely depressed in his heart. Indeed, his intelligence is too poor. Not to mention the first 200 years, in the following 300 years, he only learned 2 divine powers. Spreading beans into soldiers and calling for wind and rain. Compared to Duobao's 15 divine powers, the difference is clear at a glance. While Yi Changqing was feeling depressed in his heart, he also felt that he was truly a treasure. There is a reason why he can become the leader of a religion in the future. Just this kind of insight has left countless creatures out of reach. But fortunately, I have a system. Otherwise, maybe soon you will really surpass me. Detected Duobao challenging the host, please make a choice. Option 1. Accept the challenge and defeat Duobao. The reward will permanently increase your understanding by 10 times. Option 2. Accept the challenge but lose to Duobao. Reward 1 top-notch spiritual treasure the day after tomorrow. Option 3. Refuse the challenge. Reward 10,000 years of cultivation. After hearing the sudden choice from the system, Yi Changqing remained calm on the surface, but was overjoyed in his heart. He chose one without hesitation. It's so drowsy. Just give him a pillow as soon as he arrives. The system is really thoughtful. If one's intelligence is permanently increased by 10 times, wouldn't it mean that one's intelligence will even surpass that of Duobao? No matter how bad it is, it won't be worse than him. Thinking about Yi Changqing, he felt a little excited. Finally, I no longer have to experience the pain that Mao couldn't even comprehend for hundreds of years. As for those top-notch spiritual treasures and 10,000 years of cultivation, they were directly overlooked by Yi Changqing. What are these two rewards worth compared to 10 times the perception? Rewards have been distributed as the sound of the system sounded. Yi Changqing suddenly felt a sense of coolness in her mind. Then he felt that he had a different feeling when looking at things. But now is not the time for research. Duobao is still waiting next to him to spar. Duobao, you are really my lucky star. If Duobao doesn't come, I don't know when I will be rewarded with 10 times my intelligence by the system. So, Yi Changqing's gaze towards Duobao was filled with sincere joy. He smiled at Duobao and said, "Junior brother, let's go over there. It's spacious over there." From his face, there was no hint of dissatisfaction towards being challenged. Upon seeing this, Duobao's fondness for Yi Changqing also greatly increased in his heart. He couldn't help but think to himself, "Senior brother, you really have a broad mind. With this pattern, no wonder you can become a senior brother." Subsequently, Yi Changqing took Duobao to a distant open space. This place is far from Yi Changqing's wooden house, so there is no need to worry about the battle affecting the wooden house. "Junior brother, let's start." "Senior brother, I have offended you." After greeting each other, the two of them took action simultaneously. I saw Duobao's body suddenly expand. In the blink of an eye, it was already several tens of zhang high. It is the divine power. Size as desired. Then, with a flash of his body, he charged towards Yi Changqing. As he ran, the sky and earth were filled with flying sand and stones blocking the sun, scattering towards Yi Changqing with his body. Divine power. Flying sand and moving stones. Not only that, Yi Changqing can also clearly feel Duobao's every move and gesture, carrying terrifying magic. The magnificence of that magic far exceeds the level of the middle stage of the Golden Immortal. Divine power. Subdue dragons and tigers. Good guy, with just one move, all three divine powers come out together. Yi Changqing dare not be careless. The defensive shield cannot be used temporarily because he has not had time to refine it. But it's not a big problem. Just one sword is enough to deal with it. The top-quality immortal sword from the day after tomorrow appeared in his hand. His divine thoughts moved, and the immortal sword flew out in an instant. Suddenly, an infinite sword light weaved a net in the air, blocking all the flying sand and stones outside. Bang! Duobao's punch hit the sword chi net. With a click, the net of sword energy shattered. However, flying sand and stones have been stopped, and it doesn't matter if the net is broken. Next, there will be a battle between the physical body and the sword. However, after a while of fighting, Duobao still had a helpless expression on his face and withdrew from the state of Zairui. There is no way, the size of Rui can only change the size and strength of the body, and the defense has not increased much. He has been at a disadvantage by constantly clashing with the sword. Duobao stood in the air, with a serious expression on his face. He pointed his right hand at Yi Changqing and said in a plain tone, "Thunder." As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderbolt with a thin arm thickness fell from the sky, crashing towards Yi Changqing's body. Lay fa. Yi Changqing's face changed. This is one of the strongest means of attack, no worse than the attack of kendo. He dare not be careless at all. As his mind moved, the long sword immediately met him. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Duobao defeats again, and his martial arts finally achieve. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 10 Duobao defeats again, and his martial arts finally achieve. Yi Changqing is not unfamiliar with the thunder technique used by Duobao. This is a divine power. To control the five thunder. Heavenly thunder. During the 4 seasons of the heavenly order, all things occur, preventing calamity, defeating demons, battling epidemics, capturing all stubborn troubles of demons, aiding life and childbirth, and healing great suffering, landmines. They generate all things, nourish the 5 grains, eliminate insects and locusts, slay mountain spirits and monsters, clean up the haze and miasma, dispel dead souls, resist with restraint, and pray for clear rain, mine, also known as dragon mine. Mainly responsible for thunder causing rain, relieving drought, cutting off dragons, venomous snakes, evil mirages, and spirits, promoting wind and clouds, and managing the affairs of the water mansion, Shenlei. The main killer of war, not properly worshipping the divine deities, having created the 5 connections of mountain and kuei, as well as the spirits of Buddhist temples, pagodas, houses, and temples, social thunder, also known as demon thunder. Killing ancient artifact elves, subduing the original energy, destroying altars and temples, no need to report to Chen, can be used cheaply. And what Duobao is unleashing is the heavenly thunder among them. Yi Changqing released his immortal sword from his hand. In an instant, countless sword shadows appeared. They are arranged and combined in an orderly manner according to certain rules. Finally, a sword net was formed to cover the sky and the earth, firmly protecting Yi Changqing. This time's sword net is much stronger than the sword net that Yi Changqing casually used to block flying sand and stones just now. In the distance, Duobao looked at Yi Changqing's sword and net techniques, feeling incredibly shocked in his heart. He didn't expect that Yi Changqing's swordsmanship had already become so strong. His face suddenly felt a bit dejected. Because he realized that his challenge was about to fail again. The other party has such powerful swordsmanship skills, but I have no means to compete with them. At this moment, Duobao also recalled the words spoken by Tongtian in the Sanqing palace 500 years ago. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Precious essence is not expensive much. For 500 years, although I have mastered 15 divine powers, all of them are just beginners. Not even one has reached the level of proficiency. And above being proficient, there is also being extraordinary. After reaching perfection, there is a return to simplicity. If one can cultivate a divine skill to the point of returning to simplicity, then they can definitely resist Yi Changqing's swordsmanship. And on the other side, Yi Changqing saw Duobao feeling a bit lost in thought and immediately seized the opportunity to follow his figure. The next moment, he transformed into a blue long sword, carrying an unparalleled sword light and shooting towards Duobao. Duobao was awakened by the terrifying sword light. At this time, whether it's using the escape technique or indulging in the golden light of the earth, it's of no use. Whenever he thought of his weakness in the face of Yi Changqing's blow in the past, he felt his scalp tingling. I can't stop it. Can't avoid it. Being hit is absolutely serious injury. While Duobao tried his best to defend himself, he quickly spoke up and said, "Senior brother, be merciful. Junior brother has given up." After hearing Duobao's words, Yi Changqing controlled his body to stop while also transforming into a human figure again. He looked at Duobao and said with a sincere smile, "Since junior brother has already given up, let's call it a day for this sparring. In the future, junior brothers are welcome to come and compete with me at any time." Yi Changqing's eyes narrowed slightly as she thought to herself, "I wonder if the system will still give me a choice next time Duobao comes to compete with me. If given a choice every time, it would be so satisfying." Duobao smiled bitterly at the words and said in a ashamed tone, "I'm sorry to disturb senior brother this time. I'll take my leave, junior brother." Duobao thought to himself that in the future, he should wait until he has full confidence to come and compete with his senior brother again. Otherwise, being abused every time would be too uncomfortable. Subsequently, Duobao left. Yi Changqing also turned around and returned to the wooden house. After thinking for a moment, he decided to try the effect of 10 times his intelligence first. So he continued to comprehend the 36 laws of the heavenly gang. After 10 years of enlightenment, I have achieved great success. After 30 years of enlightenment, the great escape of the 5 elements has been achieved. 50 years of enlightenment, control the 5 lightning achievements. Time slowly passes by like this. 500 years have passed quickly. On this day, the voice of Duobao rang out again from outside the wooden house. Is senior brother there? Junior brother, please see me. After hearing Duobao's voice, Yi Changqing felt a sense of joy in her heart. He quickly walked outside and saw Duobao. With an expectant expression on his face, he asked, Junior brother, are you here to compete with me? Upon hearing this, Duobao quickly shook his head and said in an urgent tone, No, no, junior brother. I have not yet achieved my supernatural powers, so I dare not compete with senior brother. I am here on the order of my master to invite my senior brother to go to the Qing palace together. After hearing that Duobao was not here to compete, Yi Changqing felt a bit disappointed. But then he asked curiously, do you know why master asked us to go there? Duobao nodded and said, Master said, he has already created a cultivation technique for us. Upon hearing this, Yi Changqing exclaimed with a surprised expression, that would be great. Let's go over quickly. Before the Luo Jin Xian, practicing martial arts was still very important. A top-notch cultivation technique that can even save countless years of hard work. Of course, saving time is only one aspect. What's more important is to cultivate top-notch techniques, with a purity of magic and a thickness ratio far exceeding that of ordinary cultivators. This is also the advantage of the disciples of the great sect. Countless creatures have broken their heads and are eager to join the sage's great cult. Seeking support is one aspect, and top-notch martial arts are also an undeniable reason. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the Sanqing palace. I pay my respects to my master. Yi Changqing and Duobao saluted the celestial path on the main seat. Tongtian waved his hand and said with a smile, no need to be polite. I, along with your 2 senior uncles, have spent thousands of years and finally created your cultivation techniques. I will name it Sanqing Cave Xuanzhen Jing as my teacher, and now I will pass it on to you. I hope you practice well and strive to prove your teachings as soon as possible, Dalai Lama. Speaking, Tongtian flicked his finger. 2 streams of light flew out of his fingertips and eventually fell into the eyebrows of Yi Changqing and Duobao, disappearing. Thank you very much for giving me the Dharma, master. Yi Changqing and Duobao quickly bowed to thank Tongtian. Tongtian shook his head and laughed. After a pause, he continued. Well, 2,000 years later, Zenyuanzi Taoist Association will hold a ginseng fruit party, and you will come with me. You may not know, Jinyuan Daoyu. But just like a teacher, he is also the pinnacle of the great power of the golden immortal of the great Luo. He has a treasure tree named ginseng fruit tree. It is a top-notch innate spiritual root. This tree blooms every 3,000 years. 3,000 years one result. It will take another 3,000 years to mature. A short head of 10,000 years only yields 30 fruits. Smell it, and you will live 360 years, eat one and live for 47,000 years. Shouyuan is useless to you, but its taste alone leaves countless great minds with endless aftertaste. This ginseng fruit is the best fruit. No amount of great power can be obtained. If you go with me, you can at least get a share of the fruit. This is a great opportunity for you. Seize it well, don't miss it. End of this chapter.